In 1870, only about 10% of Africa was under European control. However, by 1914, that number was 90%. Just two countries, Liberia and Ethiopia, were free from their rule. Liberia, though, still was something of a colony, albeit an odd one. It was founded in 1847 and was led by freed slaves from the US. It existed because of American support, but Ethiopia had no foreign state propping them up. So then why, with two of Europe's greatest colonial powers at its doorstep, was Ethiopia able to maintain its independence? How did the Ethiopians, until Mussolini came along anyway, avoid colonialism? Well, first and foremost, it wasn't that Europeans just didn't care to conquer the place. The Ethiopian Empire, also known as Abyssinia, survived the scramble for Africa in opposition to the goals of Europeans. The empire existed for about 7 centuries, but as Europe began to take an active interest in Africa in the 1800s, Ethiopia was not a centralized state. Instead, during a period known as the Age of Princes, Ethiopian emperors possessed virtually no power outside of their capital, Gondar. The princes, or more accurately, warlords, who often came from other branches of the imperial Solomonic dynasty, controlled different bits of the country and constantly fought one another over territory. To oversimplify, that made everyone pretty miserable, as war tends to, but luckily for Ethiopians, by 1855, the Age of Princes had come to an end, with the rise of Emperor Tewodros II, who, through military force, unified Ethiopia. So Tewodros claimed the throne through divine right. Unlike most African Christians whose ancestors were converted by colonial European missionaries, Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity had been Ethiopia's predominant faith since late antiquity, and Ethiopian emperors, Tewodros among them, claimed descent from the biblical king Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. In fact, Christianity was the state religion of Ethiopia even before it was adopted by Rome, making it, along with Armenia, the oldest Christian nation on Earth. Of course, that didn't stop Ethiopia's fellow Christians in Europe from interfering in their affairs, not by a long shot. Good news though, Tewodros II, as emperors go, was pretty decent and is well regarded by ordinary Ethiopians to this day. The bad news? Unity enforced by military rule only lasts for as long as one has a military. Speaking of, Tewodros' army was reasonably powerful and he was a skilled tactician, but it was also kept quite busy. For most of his reign, Tewodros was on campaign within his own country, making sure that it stayed his. However, in 1866 he sent a letter to the British government complaining about raiding on the outskirts of his kingdom. Britain promptly did nothing, so Tewodros arrested British representatives in Ethiopia. The prisoners were treated pretty terribly, and that, along with the arrests in the first place, was taken as an insult to Britain's honour. So 30,000, mostly British Indian troops, were dispatched to Ethiopia. The emperor was defeated by the British at the Battle of Magdala, and rather than become a prisoner himself, Tewodros committed suicide. Without him and his army, Ethiopia descended into civil war again, a war that would eventually be won by a new emperor, Johannes IV. Britain, by the way, had always considered the expedition to be a punitive measure. It was never meant as a conquest, so with Tewodros dead, they had left. Like Tewodros, Johannes IV was mostly stuck dealing with internal problems, but during his reign he did manage to slightly expand Ethiopia. Johannes was followed by Menelik II, who was arguably the single most successful Ethiopian emperor. Menelik modernized Ethiopia's government, began to transition the state from absolute to constitutional monarchy, and founded the modern Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. Importantly, he also used their common Orthodox Christianity to get military aid and advisors from the Russian Empire. It didn't hurt that Russia, unlike Western powers, had no stake of its own in Africa. Under Menelik, Ethiopia expanded to just about its modern borders. It was surrounded, though, on all sides by European colonies, most notably the Italian possession of Eritrea. In 1889, Menelik and representatives of Italy signed the Treaty of Wuchale, in which Ethiopia recognized Italian control over Eritrea. But the versions of the treaty in Amharic and Italian differed slightly, which gave the Italians the impression that they had just gained all of Ethiopia as a protectorate, while the Ethiopians believed that they had only entered into a treaty of friendship with Italy. When the disagreement became clear, Menelik tore up the treaty in 1893 and prepared to face an Italian invasion, which went really badly for, certainly to their surprise, the Italians. They were decisively defeated by Menelik's reformed army at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, and then recognized Ethiopian sovereignty in the Treaty of Addis Ababa. Britain and France followed suit with their own treaties shortly afterwards, and just like that, Ethiopia was a fully recognized, independent part of the international community. They would go on to be a member of the League of Nations and a founding member of the UN. Ethiopian sovereignty would only come under serious threat once more. In 1936, Italy's fascist dictator Benito Mussolini started the Second Italo-Ethiopian War and occupied Ethiopia. But the Ethiopians never accepted his rule, and despite Mussolini's nominal creation of the colony Italian East Africa, Italy never properly controlled Ethiopia and had to contend with armed resistance for its entire stay there. With the help of British imperial troops, Ethiopia was liberated during World War II. In the decades since, it has faced a myriad of complex challenges, but its independence has remained intact. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell below so you don't miss the next one. And as always, I've been James, and thank you for watching Look Back History.